As a child growing up in Shrewsbury, I'd always associated it with the oldest profession. The original name, Scrobbesburh, seems to point to this, as did Salop. Then, of course, there was Grope Lane. In researching this vlog, it would seem that many others have this association with Shrewsbury, particularly the Welsh, for whom strong family ties made such trade less obvious. I find, however, that Scrobbesburh probably meant fortified place in the bushes, which is also the origin of the Salop name and not the Norman French slang. More likely the association comes from the larger number of pubs within the town, still the third highest by population of any town in England, many which would have offered additional services. Between 1445 and 1475, the town had 18 inns, some of which were probably alehouses, but the number had reduced to 12 by 1220. The wealthiest residents resided inside the town walls, near the High Street, which was the Stone Ward, and Mardle in the Welsh Ward, with the poorest residents living in the suburbs. In 1657, a serving wench in Shrewsbury invited a soldier to drink with her. Initially she seemed respectable, but she reminded him that she'd formerly done her the courtesy of buying her a drink, and told him that she would now repay him by taking him for one. After a few drinks, the couple had crept out the back, and they had S-bleep in a ditch. Catherine Dawson had drunk so much one night that she failed to notice when someone took the keys from her girdle. It was a joke, as who could have had access to a girdle? The next morning, realising they were gone, she asked the crier to proclaim the theft through the streets until the joke was revealed, to her huge embarrassment. At the Buck's Head in Shrewsbury, I assume the one in Frankwell, the borough court records describe how Ralph Downes had entered one day in 1656 with a young woman. He led her into a small parlour, called for a flagon of ale, and fastened the door. His behaviour aroused the suspicions of a maidservant, who went upstairs to a chamber over the parlour and peered through a hole in the floor to see what they were up to. Finding her suspicions confirmed, she came down and hammered on the door until the couple came out. The bear stood by the bare steps adjacent to Grope Lane certainly was associated with being a brothel. Whilst I can find no direct reference to the King's Head on Mardle having been a brothel, it was certainly frequented by bros, and bros lined it shut. In my research for other vlogs, I'm aware of the Three Fishes, with elderly Shrewsbury residents still refusing to enter it, the old post office, the old slipper, and the loggerheads having once offered additional services to the customers. Whilst these may not be true, I suspect there were actually many more offering such services. But all this misses the most obvious and compelling reason for Shrewsbury's reputation. Since its formation until 2012, Shrewsbury was a garrison town, and like all garrison towns, a range of industries developed to service the needs of young men away from home. Maybe this even predates the foundation of Shrewsbury, as Wroxeter, Veraconing, Caravinium had been a garrison for the Legio 19 Jamia and later Legio 20 Valavitrix. Certainly the city would have included broths. Maybe I'm engaging in a flight of fancy, but I have an image of Brythonic girls servicing Saxon and later Norman soldiers in Shrewsbury. Maybe even some of the Brythonic girls had crossed the Offa's Dyke to seek work. In my professional life, I used to moderate focus groups, often within deprived communities. During one, I was made aware of the nightly movement of ladies between the Wirral, a part of Liverpool, and Leeds. and certainly travelling often long distances to work has an age-long tradition. Furthermore, in researching this vlog, there are numerous examples of Welsh ladies and Welsh clients working in seemingly more liberal Shrewsbury. As a teenager, we gave wide berth to the army recruits from Copthorne Barracks, including by the paddling pool in the quarry at night, where they would meet with local girls. Many were simply young girls with too many hormones, but some of these exchanges were almost certainly commercial. Interestingly, in researching this vlog, Shrewsbury's red light areas have always been in this area along the Severn to the west and the border with Wales. I mentioned previously that Grope Lane's original name was Grope Lane, leaving nothing to the imagination. In Thomas Phillips' History of Antiquity of Shrewsbury, 1799, the author is explicit in his understanding of the origin of the name as a place of scandalous lewdness and venery. Such names were common in medieval towns, and in Shrewsbury's case the name remained until 1561. As puritanical Protestant beliefs took over in the 16th century, the Rudon street name started to disappear. Gloucester saw his former Red Lane district renamed Love Lane, while Hereford's darkest secret went from Grope Lane to Jail Street. Worcester's Grope Lane disappeared entirely when the Technical College was built by the River Severn, while Oxford changed its name to Magpie Lane. York and Oxford's Grap lanes may predate other locations and could date back to 1220. The Victorians got rid of a lot of Grope Lanes around the country, and the only one that has remained is in Shrewsbury. Like other Grope Lanes, Shrewsbury's connected the corn, cloth and produce market in the square with the Fish Street, and meat markets, Butcher Row. Although in 1261 the market was moved from the churchyard of St Albans and St Julian's to the square, following the draining of the mere. Needless to say, Grope Lane is Grope Lane is close by St Albans and St Julian's anyway. In fact, there were accusations against the monks during the latter 14th and 15th century of using the services of Grope Lane. The friars of St Augustine were accused in the early 15th century of interacting with pros on Grope Lane, as were the monks of Shrewsbury Abbey. Whilst it may have been used for the same purpose, the name was not recorded until 1324. It would seem that Grope Lane was home to some of the town's wealthiest residents, despite what would be seen today as a somewhat sordid purpose. On September the 5th, 1591, a boy named John was baptised at Withington and buried there 11 days later. His mother, Cecilie, was listed as a common harlot. He had no father listed. In 1598, Alice Smith is accused of having an argument in the street with Anne Farr, and according to Anne, and saying to Anne, "Thou art a carted whore, and thou wast carted round about Worcester. Thou art an abominable whore, and gettest thy living only by occupany. After thy carting, thy whore's ass was washed, and thou doubt in the water." This first casting, Alice says, was that Anne was cast round about Worcester. Carting was used as a form of public humiliation, where a woman would be paraded around the streets of the town in a cart in an attempt to shame her, After the carting, Alice claims that Anne was doused in the water. The use of ducking stool is famously associated with witchcraft, but it was frequently used as a form of punishment for disorderly women. Mountfields was famous for pubs and broths, frequented by barge pullers after being paid on Frankwell Quay. And in fact, I came across listings of numerous misdemeanours in and around Shrewsbury, and they were all boatmen. But I realised that actually it was a list of boatmen's misdemeanours, but I'm sure it was quite common for them to commit crimes. Mountfields forms part of Frankwell area across St George's Bridge, later called the Welsh Bridge, which crossed the Severn opposite the medieval street of Mardle, 70 metres upstream from the current bridge. The quayside, from which a shanty-type industrial area known as Frankwell Forge was forcibly cleared in 2004, but still houses of the 18th century, the Stew, a derelict building named after a nearby brothel. That is the area's only remaining link to the town's history as a river port. Even in recent times, Frankwell has been home to broths. In 2006, 2 women were bludgeoned to death at Rachel's Health Studio in Frankwell by a man from Welshpool. Medieval times, there was a cockbite's treaty in the Welsh ward. Whilst like Grope Lane it seems explicit, its origins is unknown. In Victorian times, Rowson and Mardle were known for their ladies and houses of ill repute, largely serving farmers attending the cattle market on what is now known as Raven Meadows. In the 1861 census, Thomas Darlington, enumerator of District Number 2, identified 23 out of 240 households in the district, just under 10%, as brothels. Thomas did not use euphemisms, as Thomas did not use euphemisms of seamstresses and milliners, but referred to them directly as prose, a typical Salopian bluntness. These houses were located in Rowsill, Mason's Court, Mason's Passage, nowadays Phoenix Place, Sheep's Hut Shut, long since gone, and King's Head Shut. The unmarried or widowed female heads of many of these households were recorded as brokekeepers, and although only 2 young female occupants, both in one household, were described as pros, others were bracketed together under the occupation of brothel. Of those young women who were said to be servants or lodgers in these households, one was just 14 years old, and most were probably also pros. The legal age of consent did not rise from 12 until 16 until 1885. He listed Sarah Jones, who kept a brothel in Mason's Passage, Rowsill, and Margaret Morris of King's Head Shut, who gave her occupants their occupation as lodging housekeeper, but nevertheless has a brothel, written and underlined beneath her address by the returning officer. And most of the bros were in Rowsill area, were situated in close proximity to some of the neighbourhood's inns, which would have been used as venues to pick up customers. And many of the pros were natives of Shrewsbury, with some being daughters of former or active pros. Others came from Shropshire or beyond to take up occupations as needlewomen, but then resorted to pros because of the low wages paid in their intended employment. In this census, for the inmates of Salop Penitentiary, 4 women, originally on dogpole, but later moving to St Julian's Friars. Only the initials of the first and last names of the young women, 8 in total, were given. Names were given in full on the 4 other censuses from 1851 to 1891, which included the penitentiary, along with usual additional information. In all these censuses give us a sample of 53 out of 200 plus inmates who resided in the penitentiary over its lifetime. 35 or 66% were born in Shropshire, 5 in Shrewsbury itself. 17, 32% were born outside the county, and the birthplace of one inmate was unknown. The ages of the inmates ranged from 16 to 24, with 34 of the inmates, 64%, falling in the age range 17 to 20. The penitentiary became the Salop House before completely closing in 1901. Prior to this, pros were housed in a separate building at Shrewsbury Workhouse, which opened in 1784, on the site of the Foundling Hospital, now Shrewsbury Schools. Some of the pros typically worked in pairs, would rob their drunken or otherwise unsuspecting clients at or en route to their dens of vice. On the 4th of July 1834, Robert Brown was indicted for stealing 24 yards of ribbon from the shop of Mr. Horton on High Street. He'd stolen them to give or sell to a girl who walked the King's Head shut. In 1854, Mary Watkins plied her trade in Mardle. In February, a young man called Amsa was said to have been keeping dangerous company. He'd come from the town of Llanfair. Could this be Llanfair Waterdene, or even Llanfair Chreinian, or Llanfair Dyffryn Clwyd? And he had gone to the King's Head on a Friday night. Another man asked him to buy a drink, so Amsa pulled out a sovereign to pay. Mary Watkins took the money, called for some rum and walked off. When it was clear she wasn't coming back with drink or money, the young lad called the police, who came and arrested Mary at her house down the passage. As they were arresting, she dropped 15 shillings and sixpence on the ground. The money was handed over to Amsa, who said he didn't want to take the matter any further, and Mary was discharged. In May, Watkins was fined £2.09 for permitting her house to be used as a brothel. In June, she ran into trouble yet again. On Saturday the 10th, a man called Thomas Davies from Morton Corbett was on his way home from Wolverhampton, where he worked. He missed the final train, so he had a friend and found a place to stay at a respectable inn. That evening there were 3 jugs of ale, and Thomas went outside to relieve himself. Mary Watkins, not one to miss an opportunity, draped her arm over his shoulder and took some silver out of his trousers pocket, and also 2 sovereigns and 2 half-sovereigns were wrapped in a piece of paper in his pocket. He then followed her to the house in King's Head Passage to inquire about the money. In doing so, a bottle of port went missing from his pocket too. He reported the matter to the police. This time the authorities were fed up with seeing her. She was a regular in the jail, so they gave her a tough punishment. In 1868, Mary Callaghan and Alice Davies fought each other after boasts from their fans in a local pub over who was the best and a prize of 5 shillings. Partway through the 3rd round, Mary, smarting from a well-aimed blow, sunk her teeth into Alice's arm. A row erupted, with Alice's supporters claiming this was a gross breach of the rules. The whole commotion had caught the attention of the landowner, who threatened to call the police. This failed to stop the fight. It just moved to another field, where the ugly contest continued, and the 2 women slugging it out for another 4 rounds. The police then arrived, scattering a large crowd, but they were able to arrest Mary, Alice and 3 other spectators. Mary was sent to prison for 21 days, but Alice was unable to appear as she was already in prison, awaiting trial for another crime. It turns out she was a pro from Mardle and was accused of robbing a client in a brothel down Mardle Passage. On Tuesday, October the 5th, 1869, Alice Barnsby, a pro, was charged before the borough magistrate on Tuesday with assaulting Sarah Williams of Mason's Passage, Rosehill, on the 2nd instant. Compliance said that she was sitting in a chair in her house when defendant came in, pulled her to the ground by her hair and abused her shamefully. In defence, Barnsby said complainant had been drunk for 3 weeks and was the nuisance of the shut. A fine of 5 shillings 9 and 6pence costs was inflicted. On Saturday the 4th of August 1883, Mary Roberts, alias Zulu, originally from Wroughton in Wiltshire, was charged with being drunk and disorderly in Mardle on Saturday night. Police Constable Lloyd found the prisoner and shouting that she wanted her shilling. She was drunk and very violent, and on the way to the police station lay down. PC Lloyd had to get assistance. He asked for the chairman of the magistrates if she could mend her life. She replied, "I can amend it, sir." Being an habitual offender, Zulu was 5 shillings plus costs. In 1884, Sarah Ann Burgess, Ellen Littlehales, Margaret Griffiths, pros were brought in custody, charged with having stolen £17 from Edward Bevan, a glazier from Pentry near Nestcliff. Bevan, failing to confirm his name, meant that it was impossible to proceed with the case. The prisoners was discharged and left the court, accompanied by a number of female friends. It seems the previous morning, Bevan brought into Shrewsbury 2 young bullocks and 5 lambs, which sold for 19 shillings 7 and 6pence. He subsequently paid £19 to a moneylender and received from him £16 on another account. Up to this time he'd been accompanied by a boy, but on meeting the prisoner, Burgess gave the boy a shilling to go away. Bevan accompanied Burgess to a house in King's Head Passage, and it's alleged that whilst there, the money was taken out of his pocket and given to other prisoners. The man immediately discovered his loss, and from the information he gave to the police, the women were apprehended. And now, as a teenager, I do remember the Elephant and Castle, Ellie as I called it, and the White Hart on Mardle, not to have the best of reputations. But I believe this was more associated with petty criminality and football hooliganism than prostitution. In 1859, the Shropshire Press mentions the Great Social Evil. In the columns of advertisements and public notices included entries paid for by the Royal Institute of Anatomy and Science, offering published lectures by a Dr. W.B. Marston on the Great Social Evil. In later versions of the advert, it mentions the painful diseases which result from it, with Dr. Marston's unfailing system of treatment by which mercury is altogether dispensed with. More recently, in 2008, a flat above New York Pork, then Seven Spices Takeaway, was raided as a brothel, although rumour had it that it had also been a crack house. It had apparently been in operation for many years.